everybody, and welcome to today's episode of this Organized Life podcast. I am your host, Laurie Palau, and I am very excited to have you here. If you are listening to this in real time, we are midway through November. I cannot believe how quickly this year is gone. Next week is going to be Thanksgiving, and I think we're all busy, or at least I know I am, trying to keep my head above water with everything from work to family to just life in general. And if you feel the same, you are in for a treat, because today's guest is we're going to have a great conversation. Joining me today is Hawley, and Amber is a licensed therapist, and she's a coach, and she's a podcast host. And I was actually a guest on her show, and the name of her show is The Easily Distracted Entrepreneur. And it's super fitting because Amber teaches other adults who struggle with ADHD or ADHD-ish type tendencies. And Amber is somebody herself who struggles with this. And we've done episodes like this in the past, and they've gotten such great feedback. Anybody who's been around for a while knows that I parent a child with ADHD. And so this is something that I think a lot of people struggle with, whether or not they have an actual diagnosis or not. And how do we navigate that in life? And what does that look like in our world when it comes to trying to live an organized life? And so we're going to talk about all the things. And I wanted somebody who kind of walks that walk, who could speak as somebody who's been there and can tell us about some of the strategies that work and some that probably don't, that we might think do. So without further ado, let me welcome my guest, Hawley, to the show. Welcome, Amber.
Well, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
It is so great to have you here. So I gave our listeners a little bit of a backstory, very, very, very top line. Why don't you, in your own words, tell everybody a little bit about who you are?
Well, I feel like you covered a lot, but yeah, I'm a business owner, an ADHD ENFP is what I like to say. The ENFP is the Myers-Briggs personality type.
Yeah,
I know. I love all that stuff, which basically means like an ENFP with ADHD is like a professional squirrel chaser, because like shiny objects are just my jam. And so that, resisting those urges is really, really hard, like, because it is in my DNA to do so. But I have multiple businesses, and I have 3 young children. And so doing all the things is something that, has always been something I want to do. But I do help people just like me who, want to make our lives a little bit easier and more streamlined, because, it can be great to want to do all the things. But like you said, overwhelm is just kind of a state of being, I think, at this time. So that's a little bit about me.
I love it. So I'm for all our other Myers-Briggs listeners out there. So I'm an ENTJ. So yes. So those are my Myers-Briggs.
I was going to say, I think all of us P's need a little J in our life. Like
yes.
The J's, we need a J to balance us.
Yes. Yes. That's so funny. So, and we did a whole episode on, gosh, it's probably going back like 2 years. I'll link to it in the show notes, but we did a whole episode about clutter and Myers-Briggs. Like, how can we like use that as a tool? And I love all that stuff. I have a whole framework with using the Enneagram, and I love Myers-Briggs. And I think anytime that we can understand ourselves a little bit better, not to use that as an excuse for like, well, this is what I am, and so deal with it, but using that as information to say, how can I be the best version of myself? I think that we can all benefit from that, regardless of where you struggle and where you're, thriving. So how old are your kids? Just to give us some context, because I know you have 3.
They are currently 11, 9, and 7.
Right. So I always say like, that's a good age, because they can wipe their own butts. They're not driving. So you still have a little bit of control over like who they interact with, what kind of like play dates, do they still call them play dates? Who they hang out with. So you still have a little bit of say so in their lives. But you don't have to be as hands-on, but it's also comes with its own challenges. There's a lot that goes on. So, being a parent in general is challenging. Then being a parent with ADHD is got to be a whole other layer. And your husband has ADHD.
And my husband has ADHD. And I know my two oldest children for sure do. Like, they've not been officially diagnosed, but obviously as a therapist, I can diagnose. But I mean, I see the tendencies. My youngest, she's still at that age where it remains to be seen, but definitely there's a lot of ADHD going on in this household.
So, and I think like anything, that ADHD is probably a spectrum, correct? And you could speak to that a little bit better. Actually, could you speak to that for our listeners a little bit? Because so many people throw the word around, whether loosely or clinically. Can you just actually give us that clinical definition?
Yeah, well, so the person that I subscribe to his model, because there's the DSM, which is our diagnostic manual, where anybody in the mental health field or doctors will kind of go through a criteria to say whether or not somebody has ADHD. But it's very limited, right? It can just say like yes or no, but it doesn't actually catch, like you said, the variations that occur in people. So there's this very well-respected, he's actually a child psychiatrist, Dr. Amen, and he talks about there being 7 different types of ADHD, and that you can actually have more than one type, right? So in that you get really unique combinations, because, in my therapy practice, one of my specialties is working with couples. And so when you work with couples, you're going to see a lot of people with ADHD, although not all couples therapists realize this. They say that the average couple goes to 6 therapists before the person gets diagnosed, if they didn't already have the diagnosis. And because it shows up very different. But the problem is we can prescribe these, like, this is what you should do when you're working with a couple, and it's like you might be expecting somebody with ADHD to do something that just really isn't in their wheelhouse. So anyway, going back to the different types, you have it show up, and that's why sometimes people will be like, I think I have it, but I'm not sure, or I'm doing this or that. And frankly, at this point, I feel like our world is just built to create distraction for all of us. So the fact that we can't focus for very long or keep our attention on something, or we kind of drift, I mean, our world is modern world is set up for that. And especially in entrepreneurship, because you're wearing so many different hats and so much stuff is going on, and you're expected to balance all of these things and manage it all. Of course, things are going to drop. You're going to forget things. You're going to feel like, you can't finish working. You get like everything about 60% done. That doesn't necessarily mean you have ADHD, but like still it's a good starting point, right? To understand, like, I have to do something different.
And it's funny because not to turn this into a therapy session, but as somebody who really feels like, for the most part, when it comes to organization, I have a pretty good handle on it. And I don't think I have I don't think I have ADHD, but the big but is at this point, and this usually happens to me like seasonally at this time of the year, like at the end of the year, as we're going into the holidays, you're just tired from going. And I'm feeling, I have my own levels of feeling of burnout and distraction, and where do I focus and what do I prioritize? And again, I talk about this for a living, and I'm very good at knowing what to do. But even if you aren't somebody that, again, has a diagnosis of struggling, I think we all struggle because, like you said, we live in this world where we're constantly bombarded by distractions. There's constantly things that are striving for our attention and our focus. And so even in the best circumstances, that shiny object syndrome, we can all feel like it. So,
oh, absolutely. I mean, and if you think about, social media, and I know there are people that hate it and people that love it, but how many people do you know that say, oh, I need a little bit of time for myself, a little self, care time or whatever. And what they're doing is they're scrolling Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or whatever, and they're going through that. Those platforms are actually built to stimulate our brain and to create us like craving those dopamine hits and wanting more. So it's even the things we're doing to like wind down, quote unquote, are actually exacerbating the problem. So it's definitely an issue. But going back to like the 7 types, again, how my husband's ADHD shows up is very different than mine. He has.
Can you walk us through what those are? Because I'm curious, because I always knew of a couple from when I had Logan diagnosed years ago. But I would love to hear those 7 types.
Yeah. And of course, now my fear will be that I'll forget some.
It's okay. We won't hold you to them. We'll get what we get, and we can always look them up later.
Good. Because
we'll look them up later and include them in the show notes.
But I do feel I feel I quite possibly am coming off a long bout of COVID, and so I have that foggy brain thing going. So that is, it's one of those things where it's that fear of like, will I remember? So yeah, so my husband has kind of the inattentive type is, so typically what they say is it's the new way to say ADHD in the DSM, according to the standard is it's ADHD with or without hyperactivity, or you can have combined type. So there's 3 different diagnoses. And so, from Dr. Amen's perspective, he's like, well, most people don't have hyperactivity. And even if you did as a kid, when you grow up, most people grow out of that. Now in the typical diagnosis, I have the combined type, but with Dr. Amen's, I actually fall under 3 of his categories. So I have one, and I have for so long, because I constantly call it obsessive type, and that's not what he calls it. But once you say,
I'm going to look him up. I'm on if anybody's watching on YouTube, I'm going to look it up while you're talking. So keep going.
Good. Dr. Amen's 7 types of ADD. And so I call it obsessive type, but I know it's called something else. But when I say it to myself enough, that's what I remember when I'm thinking of it. So mine shows up where, it could be a little more like OCD-ish in a way, not to just keep throwing out, letters and acronyms, but there's that, and which is probably why I never got diagnosed until I was 41, because people with this type, I think, learn or develop coping mechanisms to kind of compensate for some of the struggles that we have with ADHD, but there becomes a point where your bandwidth isn't enough. And so, at that point, like even my coping mechanisms no longer worked, and it just kind of started to spiral down.
I got them right here. I have them right here. Okay.
So yeah, so the obsessive type, it's called something else by him, but that one, that's why like I'm really good about always putting something back where it belongs, or I have these little routines that kind of keep why I don't forget things or lose things as much as other people with ADD or ADHD would have, because I have that piece to it. Whereas my husband is kind of that classic, like spacey type. And under Dr. Amen's, I believe he calls it classic ADHD.
Yeah. So his number 1, and again, because I don't want to jump ahead. So his number 1, it says the classic ADD. Yeah. And I'm not going to go through all the descriptions, but we'll link up to it in the show notes. So everybody can, if you're interested, they could go in and do a deep dive of each one. But yeah, the first one is the classic, and second is inattentive. And then third, he has as the overfocused. Now, would that be?
That's mine. Yeah. Overfocused. I always call it obsessive, but it is called overfocused.
And and it's funny because not funny, but we were talking about this on your show. So my Logan has that, I believe. She was always told she had combined, but now like looking at this, because we went through a period where she was struggling with almost OCD, and she talked about it on my show. So, and we can also link up to that for anybody that's interested, because it was really, really great for parents who have kids with ADHD to hear from her, or ADD, whatever you want to, call it, to hear from her in her own language, like what it was like growing up with this and what her experience was. And for a while, she would hyper focus on something to the point where it was almost like an OCD, but it was really like a form of her ADD just being masked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which, case in point, because I've been sick for like the last month, I had a day where I felt kind of well on Monday. And no, it wasn't Monday. It was last week. Sorry, last week. And I needed to get some stuff done. And I started working. And all of a sudden, I heard a noise outside of my bedroom. My husband and I were sleeping separately because of quarantining, because this, thinking I had COVID. And I heard a noise and I look up and I realized my kids were up. It was 7 a.m. So I had hyper focused until 7 a.m. that
Oh my
day.
gosh.
And I was like, oh my God, this really sucks because I had a full day. But that's the kind of thing where somebody who has that, no, everybody with ADHD can do that hyper focus thing, but man, we can really do it. Like we're really good at it. So yeah, so there's the over focus, then like the classic or the spacey, that can kind of fall under inattentive. My husband is the classic ADHD that you think of where they're constantly losing things. Like I can tell him something and then literally 3 minutes later, he doesn't remember we had that conversation. Like I have to make sure we had full like eye contact, that this thing was going to happen. And so, and that's the one that causes so much frustration for people. Like you said, inattentive. There's, and inattentive is part of the classic too. There's limbic, which is, has to do with kind of, being kind of like low grade, kind of like negativistic or, just kind of feeling down. So it's more of the emotional stuff. Ring of fire, which that one is where you see the explosive or they get really angry really fast. And again, we're not going to go into all of these because that would
sure. No.
Limbic, ring of fire,
anxious.
Anxious. Yes. Anxious ADHD, which
I feel like they're all like I've seen little pockets of each one of these in, my kid and in other people. My husband's got ADD. So like I've seen little like snippets of that type of behavior, in each of those.
And the thing is with ADHD, because it does cause so much problem in functioning, either in relationships or in your work or in schoolwork, there is so much overlap. So even if you technically were classic, you're going to see anxiety because it causes a lot of distress for people. So even though it may not be like, it may not show up, just as like that one type, there's so much overlap. So that's the thing where he does have an assessment, a free quiz you can do online to kind of get more information about that. And the last one.
Oh, wait, I just closed out.
I
think you got them.
Overfocused, limbic, ring of fire, anxious.
Temporal lobe.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, so there's a lot of variation for sure. And then the thing is though, understanding like how somebody with anxious ADHD is going to approach something, you're probably going to need to do something a little bit different than somebody who is like classic ADHD, right? So even though the symptomology may overlap, you're still going to like the approach to get them to get on board with something or to have something work for them. It's just going to vary because we're humans. We're very complex. So it's that cookie cutter thing just doesn't work, right?
I love that you said that. And I just want to jump in for a minute to really, really hone in on that, because so much of what I do, especially when it comes to organization, and we were talking about this on your show where we were talking about the different types of clutter, not just your physical clutter that you see, but so much of what people, and again, I'm not trying to put everyone in a box, but if you do struggle with ADD of any variation, a lot of times you will struggle with whether it's executive function or procedural processing or time management in a big, broader kind of scope. And so knowing that adds all of these layers of frustration and overwhelm, and it can result in, feelings of inadequacy. And it can come out and trickle down into so many different ways. And I find that that's why it's so important to try to match the right strategy and approach to where you are as a person, as opposed to saying, this is how you do it. And if you do this every day, this is where you will go. Because and that might work for some people, but I can feel that I've seen it be almost counterproductive, because the folks that strategy, that in the box strategy doesn't work for, just makes them feeling worse and saying, well, forget it. I may as well just throw my hands in the air and, be disorganized for the rest of my life. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Exactly. And that becomes the problem, right? It's, I see this with sometimes with people who are productivity experts. And, again, working with entrepreneurs, they estimate like 40% of entrepreneurs have ADHD. And if you're told like, this is the way you have to do it, and then this is tried and true. We know this to be true. This is what you have to do. And you try it and it just doesn't work for you. Then you start to feel like, I'm not good enough. It's a failure on my part. I'm never going to be good at this. Maybe I shouldn't be an entrepreneur. All of these things start to come up, as opposed to understanding like your brain works differently. And so you have to approach it differently. And unfortunately, the crappy part is you kind of sometimes have to experiment to figure that out, right? Because some of that classic knowledge does work for some people. But I think the problem is when we say, no, this is just the right way and you need to get on board. And, and I had, there was somebody I was having a conversation with who's a productivity expert. And she said, well, when it becomes painful enough, you'll make a change. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. Because you got to understand with ADHD, like it's pretty damn painful. Like you feel pretty miserable. I'm a very organized person because I have that obsessive type. See, I'm never going to say his over-focused type. And I'm super organized because I have to be. It also gives me a sense of peace. Like I love things color-coded and labeled. Like I love a spreadsheet. Like I say, organization is my porn. Like I love it. So of all the ADHD types, I'm probably the most organized. And there are still times where I do things and I'm, you have that frustration with yourself and like, oh my God, why did I do that? That was so dumb. Or why is this still a problem? And, it's so easy, right? Like that's the thing. But realizing like I can be in deep, deep pain for all years. It's not going to change it. I need a different tactic. And so like letting go of that and just accepting like, you just work different. Your brain works different. It doesn't mean you're crappy. It doesn't mean you're not good enough. It just means you need to figure out a different strategy. And so that kind of advice, like you said, I think is really harmful for people.
I agree. I love it. It's really, really important. I want to tell a quick story and then we're going to go to break. But it's kind of fitting to what you were just talking about. So when my girls were young, and they would come home from school. I mean, I'm talking like elementary school age and they're grown and both in college now. But when they were young, I had, with my older daughter, who's kind of like neurotypical, I was like, okay, you're going to come home from school. You're going to unpack, undo your backpack, have a snack, do your homework. And then you can go play. And that worked for her. That was great. And that's how my brain worked. And I work like that. Well, fast forward a couple years, when kid number 2 came up, who's wired completely differently. And first of all, she was exhausted physically when she would come home from school because she had to be so like rigid, not rigid, but you know what I mean? Like she had to sit at her desk. She had to be in that box kind of, so to speak, for 8 hours. When she came home, it was really, she was exhausted because her body was kind of like letting go. So I had to adapt to that. But the other big thing was about doing her homework. And the longer I would ask her to sit in silence without distraction to do a task and focus, the worse off it was. And this was only learned through trial and error and tears and yelling and all of the things that you don't want to do as a parent, but that until we figured out, she was like, no, I need to listen to music, have something else in the background. And for me, I'm a subscriber that like, you don't multitask when you're doing something that requires your attention. You can multitask if you're like folding the laundry, but if I'm working on a presentation, I'm not multitasking, but she can. And my husband can. And as I started doing more research about ADD, and also when I started doing my research with the Enneagram and looking at, there are pockets of people who really do, as much as studies show that multitasking is not good for productivity, I've had to kind of retract my statements and say, you know what? For her, she does need this. She needs that to whatever circuits her brain is working on, she needs that. And so for me to just kind of double down on my, nope, we do this and then we move on to that, didn't work. And so as somebody who is in a position of authority to give advice and recommendations to people, I really think these kinds of conversations are so critical because most people mean the best, but sometimes their approach, like you said, with this other productivity expert can be damaging.
Yes. And, and to your point, I agree that actually, multitasking is not good, but she wasn't multitasking. In order to focus on that task, she needed something to occupy this back part of her brain that's like, otherwise we'll sit and have all these other thoughts or kind of like, they're like little puppies running all over the place, And so she needed something. And so having, music on or having a show on in the background, it kind of occupies that back part of her brain is kind of how I describe it. It literally isn't the back part, but it does, it allows then this level of focus in this part where we're focusing on our task. And that would be contrary to what one would think is like, no, you need that silence in order to focus. But that's part of the problem with ADHD. They actually have brain scans of this. When we try to focus, usually what you'll see is those parts of the brain that are, responsible for like that cognitive functioning or whatever is going on, they will light up. So meaning that it's like something's happening and the focus is happening. But the more we focus, the less it lights up. There's a lack of dopamine and it's not doing the thing it's supposed to, but somehow having these other parts be engaged allows us to focus. And so it's just understanding that it's literally your brain. You're not a good enough person. It's just your brain works different. So you've got to engage them and you've got to figure out what that stimulus is, like you said, through trial and error. But it's really important to kind of recognize that instead of feeling bad or stigmatizing somebody or calling them lazy, you have to understand it just works different. I know. And I think I probably have had one of those moments where I just reached my breaking point with my daughter. And I said that, like, oh God, that's just stop being so lazy and do this. And I'm like, I know better. Like, I know better.
Yes.
We're human, right?
Yes. Yes. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit. I want to switch gears and talk about parenting as someone with ADHD and like the things that you need to do. So sit tight and we'll be right back. How many of you have ever thought, I have absolutely nothing to wear, even though you're staring at a rack filled with clothes? If that's you, you are absolutely not alone. I dreaded shopping. I dreaded the thought of shopping until I met my friend, Jeannie Stithmawinnie, who's the founder of Your Color Guru. Your Color Guru looks at your personalized style, hair color, eye color, complexion, and helps match what color schemes look best for you. So instead of sitting there buying things that you think are going to look good or that you hope look good, Jeannie actually allows you to shop freely within the guise of saying, these are the colors that make you look your best, which quite frankly, who doesn't want to look their best? So she put together a special coupon code for This Organized Life listeners. And I can tell you that I've been getting tons of thank you notes from people saying this has completely revolutionized how they shop and allowed them to make smarter choices when they are going to, whether it's online shopping or in-person shopping. So I encourage you to check this out. Visit her website, Your Color Guru, and she gives a special promo code to all This Organized Life listeners. Just punch in the code Organized Life and you can get 10% off your consultation. I am telling you, it is a game changer. It was a game changer for me, and it is a game changer for all of the people who I know have been working with her for the past 2 years. So definitely check it out. And when you talk to her, make sure to tell her that I sent you. Okay, Amber. So again, you not only have struggled growing up and figuring out how to navigate your own life, but now here you are as a grown-up, as an adult, and you're married to somebody who also has their own unique struggles, and you guys parent kids. So that's challenging enough on a good day. So then factor in, all of the other kind of hurdles that you're kind of serpentining and running around. Talk a little bit about that. How do you run your household knowing that you have some of these pitfalls? What are some of the strategies that you put into place? Give us a kind of some snapshot into your life.
Yeah, I think, with my husband and I, a little bit of it is divide and conquer. So like figuring out, because we have different types of ADHD, I have certain strengths that just come more natural to me, and my husband has other strengths that come more natural to him. So figuring out which one of us like is best suited for a particular type of thing, right? So unfortunately for me, because I right now have 3 businesses. I'm very good at, like I said, organizing or kind of running things, but I have a lot on my plate, so it's tough. But I'm the person who's going to be more on top of like, hey, there's schedule stuff, there's like these things need to happen, but I can't be the one who's doing it all. Like that, I can't own that because there's just too much on my plate. So some of it is just me having like, I'm aware of the bigger picture, and then I have to be like, hey, I think this is Spirit Week. Now, granted, our kids are really good, and probably because they kind of somewhat have to, they're pretty good about, because they're excited about things, that they will bring it up and mention it and remind my husband, because he's really not, this is not his strong suit. So, it's like giving him that overview and saying like, okay, this is the stuff that needs to happen, or like,
So
hey,
so delegating, basically, like
yeah.
you're saying, here's where we have the kids have Spirit Week. I need you to get whatever.
And I don't even tell them what it is. I'm like, you got to check in with them or actually go read, So sometimes there's there was something that just happened recently where I said, why, I asked you to send like the thank yous because we had people donate to our, family donate to our kids for this fun run. And I said, I asked you to do the thank yous and I remember it was a Friday, and the fun run because of rain got moved to Monday. And I said, can you make sure you have the kids call everyone and thank them for their donations? And he's like, well, I'll do it after the fun run happens. And I looked at him like, no, I can't tell him. I mean, I say it, but he's in charge of his own life, right? So I was like, well, I think you should do it today. And he's like, oh, I'll do it. I know if he doesn't do it right then, he's not doing it. Like, because he doesn't write it down. He doesn't follow a list like I do. So it's just not going to happen. But I was like, okay, I've given it to you. It's yours. So of course he didn't do it and he forgot. And so then I'm like, hey, have you done it yet? Because, I don't want to reach out about something else until this has been done. And he goes, no, I haven't even gotten the thing about how many laps they did. And I said, well, do you think that there's going to be somebody's going to come with this announcement and say, dun, da, da, Liam did 35 laps? I go, it's called an email. That's how they contact you.
Oh
But he
my
never reads his
gosh.
email. So, I mean, we laugh about it because we both get like it. I'm just like, do you think someone's giving you a formal announcement to the front door? Like, you have to open your email to find that information. And so, I think we've developed and of course, not always is it that funny, but it was like, come on, dude, like open your email. Like, you need to do this. So, yeah, some of it is delegation. Some of it is like, I've given it to you and now I have to let it go. Like, that's just, I can't be the one that's in charge of that. But I still I know I'm going to be the one that's holding the bigger picture for things.
I think it's interesting because so many people listening, I think, would just be like, you know what? I'm just going to do it myself. Right. He's not doing it. He's not doing it in the timely fashion that I want. Cause I get that a lot. I'll delegate. I'm a great delegator, but in my mind, when I delegate something to you, chances are I kind of want it done now. Like I'll say, can you put away your laundry or can you fill in the blank? And by me saying that in my mind, that means like in the next 20, like kind of now.
Exactly.
And my kids don't necessarily interpret it like that. They're like, yeah, we'll do it. Yes, we will do it, but we might do it a week from now. We might do it. And so I think there's that like gray area of when we delegate, at what point do we need to be more specific And what point do
Yes.
people say to avoid that communication breakdown, as well as saying, forget it, you're not sending it out, I'm just going to do it myself, which then has its own set of issues.
Exactly, which I did for a long time. And, but now my husband is retired. So, and I'm running businesses and taking, like, I'm the primary breadwinner. So I'm like, there's only so much I can invest in this. But going back to that communication piece, first of all, everything can't be I need this done now, because that's your agenda. That might not be their agenda, right? So I agree. There are times where you're like, this needs to happen right now because there's something very time sensitive. And so it does need to happen. But even like that example is, I would have preferred it happen that day because I already knew it wouldn't happen if it didn't. But at the same time, like, he's an adult, and is it life or death? No. So I mean, do it when you're going to do it. You've agreed to it. Now it's on your plate, right? Like, you're responsible for it. And and I think, unless you're paying somebody to do something for you, and even then, when I have employees, I have people that work for me. I'm paying them, but I'm probably given them 5, 6, 7 things. Everything can't be the top priority, right? So we have to allow a little bit of space for people to do that, because I'm the same way. Like, if I'm in the middle of something, it may not look like I'm doing anything, but if I'm sitting there and I'm in the middle of something and you say, I need this done, I'm gonna be okay, but I'm not gonna do it right that second, probably, right? Because I don't think it's that urgent. Like,
And nor should you, again, unless it's like a true fire and emergency. And that I think is great. And I love it because so many times, like, what we think is important and what's important to us might not, in the grand scheme of things,
exactly.
fall in. And that is something that I know I've had to become very intentional on practicing.
Yeah. And so going back to, like, with kids, like, we'll say, hey, you need to clean your room today. So by the end of today, it needs to be done. Or, like, oh, the cleaning people are coming, so you need to have it done by noon or something like that. Like, you're giving them a little bit of leeway so that they have that autonomy, and that's them learning how to prioritize or kind of figure things out. But it's not so demanding. And at the same time, we know, especially with our young kids, like, if it doesn't happen probably very quickly after we said it, they've already forgotten. Like, it's already gone out the window. And so, yeah, I think it's strategies like that, like figuring out, giving some people leeway, because if everything is just this demand right in the moment, nobody wants to live like that either. So there's that kind of thing. I think I've also learned, like, I don't, especially with my son, giving him more than one task at a time is not going to be helpful. It's going to overwhelm him, and then he'll shut down and he won't do it. He gets very stressed by that. So giving him, like, hey, can you do this or take care of this? And then, he'll come back to me, and then I can be like, hey, when you're done, come back to me because I have something else I need done. And so giving him those pieces. And my husband is similar to that. If I'm going to give him more than one thing, I can give him 2 things, but I can see it. Like, I could take a list of like 5 things because I will actually write them down. He won't. And so, even though that would be a great strategy for him, I can see that there's kind of like that glazed overwhelm. And so I'm like, I'll give you the 2, or I'll just write a list and say, here you go. Here is the list of things. You've got to find that balance, though, because sometimes, especially if you have a neurotypical spouse, so I know I'm talking more about spouses than parenting, but
That's okay.
but you have that neurotypical spouse, you don't want to be the one that's responsible for everything, because that's going to make you feel resentful and overwhelmed yourself, right? So you've got to find that balance of things. And so I think, again, it's like the experimenting of, I just find it's easier for me, because if I have to sit and piecemeal it out, it becomes overwhelming, and then it's still on my plate. Where if I write the list and give it to them, there we go. Like, and we'll have the conversation and it's done.
Well, and there's a couple of things that you said that I just want to come back to. So first of all, I do a lot of reading and research about the whole process of delegation, whether it's in my family and where I work with clients, or as a business owner, delegating things to my team. And one of the things is, it's not truly delegated until you can, like you said, take it off your plate. If you still have to come back and check it, make sure it's done. You haven't truly delegated. You haven't truly made space in your brain to move on to the next thing. It's still there. So really being kind of clear on what that delegation piece looks like. Like once I give it to you, like you're going to see it through from start to finish, and through conclusion. And also, I was reading an article recently about, which I've read several, but I was reading one recently, again, just reiterating how our brains, even, neurotypical brains, our brains are not designed to be to-do lists. They're not. And so many people don't have a strategy, again, whether that's a list in your phone, whether that's a handwritten list, whether it's an agenda, whatever that is, but they continue to try to rely on their memory to say, what do I have to do? Whether it's going to the grocery store or what do I have to, what are the tasks I have to do at work today, whatever it is. And I see it a lot with home, especially where I see people, and I want to, talk on this next, but where people continue to say, they almost like are trying to beat the system, and where it's like, there's no defeat in finding a strategy to be able to come back and say, yep, I did it. Check that off.
Oh my gosh. I know it makes your life so much better. Like it's so much easier to not be stressed out about that stuff.
So, okay. So just not to put your husband in the hot seat. So what is his resistance? I'm just curious for people who are resistant. So what is his reluctance to find, list making of a type to help his life?
If I were to analyze him, I think there are a few.
We need a whole other episode.
Yes. Oh my gosh. But he does occasionally write lists for himself. I think for him, it's when it's his agenda, like he'll create a list. And when it's things that has on his, like, this is important, I need to get this done. That's kind of the problem with anything, even like you said, ADHD or not, like we can have a priority. Doesn't mean our partner holds the same priority. Right. So that's always that rule of like, you never clean the bathroom. It's like, that might not ever be a priority for someone. And the rule is if it's a priority for you, then you're in charge of it. Right. Like however that looks, that doesn't mean you have to do it. It just means you're in charge of it. But yeah, so I think it's honestly just not having the habit because, and that's his style. Part of it is good. He's unlike me. He's super patient and he's very like chill, but I almost think he takes his chill to the extreme level of like, I don't want to feel bothered by anything. And so it's like somehow having that list creates a little bit of tension in him. So there are times where he does it because he's like, okay, I'm looking to be productive here. And he'll write the list out. And then there are other times where I think it's like he's so not in that habit regularly that it just doesn't occur to him to write it down. So sometimes like I'll text him something. But again, just in this last few weeks, he gives me great examples where I was super sick. So I asked for orange juice. He's like, pulp or no pulp? I said, no pulp. Comes back from the grocery store, gives me a glass, and it's full of pulp, right? Like it's at lots of pulp. And I'm just,
he heard the word pulp. That's what happened. He heard the word pulp. Yes.
And here's the best part, because he does have the anxiety about it. So I drank it the next day and I joke and I say, it just cracks me up that why even ask me? And then I said, why don't you just go for the middle ground, like some pulp? Why didn't you just go for some pulp? If you didn't remember, not lots, some. And we joke about it and, he got lots, right? And I'm like, who wants lots? Like, who really likes that? But so I said that to him and he goes,
might as well just eat an orange.
I know, exactly. And he goes, well, actually, I bought both, but I just thought I would, 50-50 give you one and you tell me if it was the wrong one. And I said, why didn't you just say I've got both? Because I didn't remember which one do you want?
Gosh.
And so the other one was in the downstairs fridge. And I'm like, it just bewilders me, but it's like comical sometimes. Now there are times where I would be like pissed off because I'm like, that is not what I asked for. But it was just in that moment of like, I ultimately didn't care. But it was just, it's those kinds of things. So I think it's one, he's just not in the habit of it. It's just not his habit. And I think that's the key, is you really have to practice it over and over for it to become the habit. But I do think for him, I think there's other stuff that maybe isn't so nice, but this one I think is, I think he really doesn't want to disappoint me, and he's trying, and then he gets anxious. And I see this in my son too, where they try so hard, they get anxious, and then they don't even use like again, the logic or the middle ground where it's like all or nothing. And unfortunately, it feels like statistically it goes to the 90% of the wrong side. Like, I don't know. I'm like, statistically, shouldn't it be 50-50? Like, I don't know. Shouldn't there be a half of the time that you get it right? But I think it's that anxiety that keeps him from like, I don't want to get this wrong. And then there's probably in his brain is like, I should have wrote it down. Like, why didn't I write it down? Or, he thinks he'll remember because it was three things or something like
Yeah.
that.
One of the things that for anybody out there listening that might be, and I'm sure there are people that are out there that are resonating with what you're saying. One of the things that I found has worked in our life is, especially, some of the good things about having our phones attached to us is the fact that I can just text them what they have. And I found this with both my husband and my daughter that, because again, they too, like Logan, if that was Logan, she would just hear the word pulp. That's all she would hear, And so that wouldn't really necessarily help the problem. But so I text the order or I text the instructions to her. Excuse me. So when she gets to the store, even if it's 5 minutes later, as opposed to trying to rely on the memory or hearing just those every fourth word or whatever it is, she doesn't have to worry about it because I've already proactively said, here's what you need. And so as somebody who, even though she might not request it, I just take the assumptive approach and send it.
Yes.
If, and it can, and again, and this goes as a spouse as well. Like if Josh is like, I'm running to Starbucks, what do you want? Let me text you my order. That way it's right there. And so I think as a parent or a spouse or whatever, if you're dealing with people that maybe are resistant, reluctant, you can just take that first step, control the parts that you can control and say, okay, I know that maybe their processing is not, they're processing their focus, whatever is not 100% there. So let me take that first step. Let me go first.
100%. And that's where, so whenever I do an order, I do that. I either write it on a piece of paper or I text it when it's an order, but something like that. And then frankly, I wasn't even near my phone because I was sick.
Well, you were like dying on,
yeah, I was miserable. And it's funny to me that he even bothered to ask, so again, like it was just one of those things. But yeah, generally that's what I do. And I agree with you. I think it's a good strategy, but it's also one of those things of like, there are those times like hopefully you for the neurotypical person, like that's hard to always be put in that role of being responsible to like take care of it. And so I think that's a good strategy. And also it's okay that if every time you're like, so it's not your fault. Like, oh, well, you didn't text me the order and so I got it wrong. It's like, well, then they could call and say, hey, I don't remember your order. It's those kinds of things,
right.
right?
Absolutely. And I think it has to do with ownership. And for me, it's about modeling good behavior. And so if I'm doing this now, the goal is now, in my case, Logan will say, can you text me your order? So now she knows, not so that the responsibility is you didn't, but she will now proactively ask because she knows that that's an effective thing to work. We've talked again specifically with parenting kids with ADHD. And I talked about using like checklists and putting that, on the bathroom mirror so that she could do that. And at first that was something that was foreign, but she started to see a higher success rate and feel better about herself. And there was less yelling and less anxiety. So then she started saying, oh, it's Sunday night. Let me print out my checklist for the week. So it's just modeling that behavior. And then the goal is if it's working, they're going to want to continue it. And it's just, again, like you said, unfortunately, a lot of it is trial and error, but you've got a ton of great strategies. Before we kind of wrap up and go into our last break, where can our listeners find you to learn more? I know you also have like a download, some resources. Can you let our listeners know where to go to learn more?
Yeah. So because you're listening to a podcast, you can find me over at the Easily Distracted Entrepreneur podcast or the Couples Fix podcast. And you can go to amberhawley.com. And if you go to amberhawley.com/organize, I have a downloadable that talks about shiny object syndrome. And it's kind of like an assessment to go through and decide, is this an awesome opportunity or is it a shiny object? Because again, we're being inundated with opportunities and things and stuff. And so sometimes discerning, which is kind of a shiny object to chase and what is a great opportunity to seize can be difficult. So I would head over there.
I think as any entrepreneur needs that, regardless of whether or not you struggle with ADHD or not, because there's always something that seems awesome around the corner. So definitely check that out. We're going to take one more quick break. And when we come back, I'm just going to put Amber in the hot seat. So sit tight. If you're a professional organizer or have thought about becoming a professional organizer, but not sure where to start, you might want to check out our SBO Partner Program. It's a community of professional organizers from all over the globe who are running their own independent companies, but looking for community and some business strategies on how to grow and scale their business. To learn more, visit simplybeorganized.com and click on the Work With Me tab. All right, Amber, this has been such a great conversation. Obviously, I can relate to it on so many levels. As a parent and a spouse, and dealing with clients who struggle with some of these challenges. And I love people like you who are just bringing it to the forefront, because I think it's so important that this doesn't have to be an excuse. It doesn't have to be a label, but it starts a conversation and says, okay, this is where I am. How do I be the best version of myself? So thank you for putting out all these resources and, making all of this stuff available to everybody.
Yes.
Okay. So obviously you are somebody who inspires a lot of people. We always like to ask our guests a couple questions before they leave. First is, can you recommend a book that's been, and it could be personally, it could be professionally, but a book that's been inspirational for you that you feel like this is something that you want the world to know about?
Yeah, I'm kind of a prolific reader. So this is one of those things that's so hard to choose. But if I had to choose one that's just right now coming to me that I think about, I would go back to, there's this book and by the author named Sark. She's an author out of San Francisco. And I read this book back when I was working at a political consulting firm. Before becoming a therapist, I worked in the .com world. And I remember reading this book, and it was called Wild-Succulent Woman.
Okay.
I know, but it was my first foray. I don't know. I guess it would maybe fall under the genre of like self-help. It was my very first time, because this was in my early 20s of reading a book like that. But it was just very like, she shared her story, but she's super creative, and that's the thing. A lot of people who's, we've talked a lot about the struggles of ADHD, but there's so many gifts in it.
Oh my
There's so much
gosh, so many.
creativity and so much good stuff. But I love her approach of like self-acceptance, and just like exploring her creativity and kind of her like zest for life. And I found that really inspiring as somebody who, because I was very type A, or I am was, I'm very type A, perfectionistic type, that, you can beat yourself up a lot. And so I think for me, it just really touched my heart. I ended up moving on jobs right after reading that book. I just remember reading it on a trip to like LA, came back, and I was like, that's it. And I started looking for a new job. I was like, I just wanted something that kind of spoke to, the parts of me that weren't able to be expressed in that particular type of environment. And I don't know, it's just very powerful. So, and it's fun. It's an easy, light read. It's very colorful, different from a lot of books I read, but I love it.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I love hearing our guests' book recommendations. It's awesome. I will definitely check it out. And then our last two wrap-up questions, which are, in this particular season of your life as mom, entrepreneur, all the things, where do you feel like you are the most organized, and where do you feel like a bit of a hot mess?
Let's see. I would say I'm most organized. Well, there's a couple areas. I would say though, I think my physical space is most organized. I know that's kind of a big
No,
one.
that's fine. Yeah, that's
And
huge.
even if I bring it down smaller, I always try to keep my bedroom, my purse, and my car clean because those are kind of my spaces, and that gives me enough sanity. My office is always really clean too because I try not to allow the children in there. so I need those protective spaces. I can't expect the level of perfection in like common areas, even though I would love it. It would make me happy, but I have other people who live with me. So I'd say physical space, especially those 4 areas, I guess. And then where I'm a hot mess, I feel like digitally, because I have systems, I have people, I have everything. My email is a hot mess. It's hot mess. It's horrendous. And in fact, like sometimes when I'm doing like trainings and people can see, you know how they can see like the number of emails on your tabs.
Mhm.
I've had clients where, and I have clients who don't have ADHD because I say I do the emotional side of business. They're like, I feel very overwhelmed by seeing your number of emails.
That's so
It's
funny.
horrendous. So yeah, like my digital files, like there was organization, there isn't. It's kind of because I have like 3 different, Google Drives because I have different businesses. That feels like a mess. But email in particular, I mean, honestly, the number is like 150,000. It's like ridiculous.
That's a lot. It's a big number. I'm not a zero inbox person myself. We've done episodes on it, and I'm always looking for strategies. So yeah, I think it's hard. It's hard to keep up, especially in this day
Oh
and
yeah.
age,
They just
so
like every day in certain email boxes get like 100 emails a day. And so, yeah, like you said, I've gotten down to like inbox zero, but it took so much effort. Then after that, I'm like, ugh, I'm done. Next thing you know, 2 weeks later, it's back up, to like 1,000 or something.
well, and the thing of it is just when you approach, and this is just for anybody, not just for you that's listening, when you're looking at finding a strategy for your digital clutter, it's not just about the quick fix. It's about, again, changing the behavior so that if we wanted to, if we needed to, if it was something that we felt like we want to get a better hold on, trying to figure out, well, what is the best strategy for me to do it? One of the things that I've done recently was just a quick assessment of looking at the ratio of my incoming emails to my outgoing emails, because I'm an email scanner. So I will quickly scan, and I don't always take the time to delete because I just find like even that extra couple seconds adds up after a while. So I'll scan and see like, what do I need? And then I will notice, for example, like I did a quick audit the other day, very unofficial, but I get somewhere, it could range anywhere between 50 to 100 emails a day, but my outgoing emails are like 5 to 10. So you're literally talking about the ratio of incoming to outgoing is like 10%. So how much, and the other stuff, I don't think there's stuff that's falling through the cracks. So how much of the email that we receive is actually clutter? So that's a whole other episode. So
I could go down that one with you, but I do agree. I think it's that small habit. And I tell myself, and occasionally I do it, but I'm not in the full habit yet of when I scan, delete. Like
yeah,
don't keep that email in that email. But yeah,
right.
I do. So
I
yeah,
know we're all
email.
we're all a work in progress, Amber, and we're all doing the best we can. But
Exactly.
thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry we did not get a chance to highlight and celebrate again so many of the wonderful gifts, because I think that is so important to say. I don't care what your neuro difference is. Everybody has their superpowers. Everybody has their gifts. And I think it's a matter of trying to figure your own sweet spot with things and figuring out the strategy that works for you. So I encourage everybody, we're going to have this, the show notes are going to be chock full of information. So definitely head to our webpage for that. And you can get links to all the things that we talked about. Head over to our Facebook group, this Organized Life podcast. Connect up with Amber if you're looking to learn more. And we love hearing from you. So again, we just want you to be the best version of yourself here at this Organized Life, because it's not a one size fits all. So thank you for being here. And if this is your first time tuning in, welcome to our show. Again, super happy to have you here. Make sure to click the subscribe or follow button so you never miss an episode. Go back and listen to some of our past episodes that might, strike a chord with you. We've got lots of them. And that's it. So next week is Thanksgiving. I will be back with a very short, lighthearted Thanksgiving episode. So if you need a break from the family, pop in your earbuds and take a walk around the block, and I will be with you. All right, guys, until next week, I'm Laurie Palau. Peace out.